Hello, my name's Adam David, and welcome to my live presentation of Science of Soul. This presentation, I'm going to aim to bridge more recent scientific discoveries along with the esoteric science that is taught to people about spirituality and the soul. To sum it up, basically, a lot of research and evidence suggests that the soul is electrical in nature. And what this means is that we are surrounded by electrical phenomenon, and our souls and spirit are just one aspect of it. But really, spirit is the whole thing. So as we get into this presentation, I hope to show a collection of other people's works that I think add up to a cohesive theory that explain what we are in these human spacesuits. So I guess let's get started. So I guess a good place to start would be, what's the difference between a live body and a dead body? Well, the age-old question is, it's the age-old question, right? So the medical field would say that death is typically defined as an irreversible loss of functions like brain activity, circulation, respiration, and it's used for, and they usually use this for, determining if they're going to pull a life support on someone. So basically they're treating us like we're a bunch of wind-up dolls. In the 1900s, there were people who were thinking about this thing even then. In the 1900s, there were people that were thinking about this. For example, there was a Dr. Duncan McDougall who wanted to do an experiment where he weighed some animals before and after death. What he discovered was that there was a small amount of weight difference between the alive bodies and the dead bodies. And due to an electrical phenomenon where matter has more weight if it has charge, and it's not a lot of weight, they surmised that 21 grams was the average missing. So he surmised that because of such a small amount of weight missing, it must be that the soul is electrical in nature. So he proposed that the departing soul carries electrical charge, contributing to the observed weight loss. So to sum up my total theory here before we get into this, souls and spirit are multidimensional. And the theory is that what we call soul operates from both higher and lower octaves that are in harmonic resonance with through a sort of DNA radio. Spirit is the medium in which souls operate, and it is all-encompassing, like a river of multidimensional electrical charge, or perhaps it's the matrix itself. Reality operates in a top-down and then back up again function. So what we do down here does affect reality as a totality. While we don't dictate reality entirely, we do have some say. And finally, spirit is an electrical in nature, and it operates at very, very low microvoltages, which make it incredibly difficult to detect when we're throwing around 50, 60 volts everywhere, and 120 and 240 in some cases, and much more in a lot of others. And finally, before we really get into this, I want to point out that human vision is very narrow, and it is based off of things that reflect back at us. So we're surrounded by this large range of electrical waves that we interact with, but we aren't even aware of. So as you can see at this graphic at the bottom, a very, very small range that we're able to inhabit here. So what I want to remind us is that the word angels has always meant beings that are at an angle to us. There's probably one right here, right now. Okay. So here are the topics. I want to first focus on what is a plasma torus. Then we're going to look at what is fractality. Then we're going to look at the difference between transverse waves and longitudinal waves, or scalar waves as they're sometimes called. Then we're going to look at the reason objects fall to the ground, and how that kind of answers the reason. It kind of answers the question of what a soul is, because we'll get into it. From there, we're going to look at how sacred geometries affect electric charge and why they've been taught for thousands of years. We're going to look at why we're electrical plasma inhabiting living organisms and how that works. And then finally, we're going to look at the inflection point of consciousness, or Planck length. And I think at the totality of this, we're going to have a theory that gives us, as I'm calling it, the keys of the kingdom, so that we can start to look at things like numerology and astrology, and we can understand that they are literally real sciences that describe our reality. So, let's begin. So what is a plasma torus? To put it simply, it's an electric donut. As you can see here on the side, this is the inside of the plasma torus, and let's just assume this is a very good-looking plasma torus, the outside. So what is plasma? Plasma is the fourth state of matter in which atoms and molecules are highly energized, leading to the ionization of electrons. And this allows that all the particles to be charged inside of the plasma torus. And plasma can be found in various forms throughout nature, like the stars, like our sun, in lightning, and in the auroras. It's also used widely in technology and such. For instance, it's used in the spark gap. It's a spark gap. So the spark plug in a car is actually plasma when it ignites the engine. Here you can see on the top right, it's like one of those balls where you put your hand on there and then it would come in. The free charged particles would try to interact with your hand because it's coming towards your hand. Some of the properties of a torus. Everything within a torus' influence is pulled through its center. The outside of the torus are rotated around until reaching the inside curvature again. So basically, it goes round and round until it comes back to the center. Recursively receives information from the previous trip around the torus, and this creates the illusion of a past, present, and future from the center vantage point of the torus. So right here in the center, if you were here, to the right would be the future, and to the left would be the past, and the donut is moving in a clockwise formation around the outside. It's the shape of 99.9% of the universe, including ourselves. We'll get more into that. The outer geometrical shape of it is represented by a dodecahedron. We'll get more into that as well. And a well-functioning torus has the properties of being negentropic, which is the opposite of entropy, which is what we're all told is the final fate of the galaxy. However, it's not. And we'll get into that as well. Here down on the bottom left, you can see how a torus is formed. You basically take two flat energy structures and you have them interact with each other, and they'll wrap around each other, then they'll fold, and then you've got, through a series of steps, you get this nested torus. Here's the basic shape of a torus. As you can see on the left here, it goes around the center, back around, and then to the center again. In this example, this torus and most toruses go counterclockwise. Here are some more examples of toruses. At the top left, you can see, the galaxy. And in the middle, a lot of people just think this is what angels look like when you interact with them in their normal form. But it could also be ball lightning or any sort of plasma ball phenomenon. On the right here, you'll see the 7 different colors of the prism, from the prism when light interacts with the prism. The arrows are saying that, hey, these colors are different frequencies, and that's why they're different colors. Yeah. Okay, so next slide. I like this picture a lot. This picture sums up how everything is in this shape. Just look at this center one in the middle here. Look at this top vortex and this bottom vortex. In the center, you get this great expansion of magnetic waves right in the center of unity. Look at the tree. I love this picture. And then right here, us. Our kidneys, our heart, And moving on. The next subject is, what is fractality? To put it simply, it's perfected compression. So it's more like a slinky doll, or I'm sorry, it's like a slinky or Russian nesting dolls. Those little dolls that you take one and you open it up and there's another one a little bit smaller. It's the same shape, size, but it goes on infinitely. But these go on infinitely, as opposed to Russian nesting dolls where there is a finite amount. Or a slinky where you can stretch it out and you've got a straight line. Imagine it's like the picture on the right here. It's just continuous. So what are some definitions and properties of being fractal? To put it simply, it's an infinite repeating pattern, shape, or equation that can repeat into the microcosm or the microcosm. And it has the ability to infinitely compress without losing any information. So what that means is, if you had this Mandelbrot set right here, as you compress it smaller and smaller, all of these little spots are still containing all their information. On the next slide, we'll have more better examples. Here on the right is DNA, which is in the same way recursively non-destructive to information. You can kind of see from this angle that it is fractal in nature. So this next page has a lot more examples of fractality. Here on the left and the middle are the Mandelbrot set, zooming in and out. As you can see, it just goes on forever. This one in the middle, you can just stare out for a while. It just keeps repeating and repeating, and it's really cool. The one on the right here with the triangle, it's making a mountain out of triangles. Each time, just double the triangles. And then on the bottom left, these are actually what happens in the center of a plasma torus. As you can see, that as it goes around the center, as it goes around the perimeter, there comes a point where it reaches the inside center focal point, and it will then continue to ratchet and have this flower in the bottom left. Sorry, in the center. And here on the right, you can see a heart within a heart within a heart within a heart. Infinite fractality. We'll look more at this coming up. Continuing with our fractality, where this is the flower of life. This is a very important symbol in spiritual teaching and esoteric learning. Basically, this shape is said to contain all possible shapes within our three-dimensional reality. And it is also said to be the origin of the universe in its most simplest ways of putting it. Basically, you start with one circle up here, source. And source wanted to explore. So source goes to its perimeter, and he makes another circle of himself, or sphere. And then he goes to the focal point at the bottom and does it again. And then he goes the same thing, does it again. And each time he expands himself until he's got what we call the seed of life, which is 7 circles. Keep that in mind, 7 circles. And then from there, you keep going, and he'll get the seed of life, eventually becomes the flower of life when surrounded by another 12 circles. Keep that number 12 in mind. And then finally, to encompass it all, there's a 20th and a 21st circle to create a boundary and then a pocket between the outer boundary and there. So it is all self-contained within source. And that's just one flower of life. So the flower of life in 3D is the shape of a torus. The flower of life contains every shape known in the universe. Think of Metatron's cube, like your. The center point of each flower is interconnected with every other flower and seed of life. It's a portal. Now, what I am saying here is this center point here and here is the same one as here, here, here. They're all the same center point. Just because it's in a different location doesn't mean anything. Because due to the fractal nature of reality, something over here, something over here, and something over here are within the same fractal. Thus, they're in the same set of objects. And they all have a access point in common, this center point. Here on the right, you can see the statue that has the sphere that is the flower of life in a 3D form. Here underneath Metatron's cube, you can see the different platonic solids. And when you know how to look, you can actually find them all within Metatron's cube. Which is probably why it's said that Metatron was taken up to be the right-hand man of God, Source. But we're going to look at more of that in detail. Look at that more in detail in a later video. So with the flower of life being spherical in nature, there is the ratio known as the golden ratio, or it's phi. And in nature, it does a lot of amazing things. So it equals approximately 1.618. It's the universal principle is the golden ratio behind everything that grows in nature. If it grows, it uses phi ratio. Galaxies like the spiral galaxies like the Milky Way exhibit spiraling patterns based on the golden ratio. It influences where stars are actually going to show up. So like as you can see, the stars go along the different arms. And then pine cones, this is the macrocosm, and now here's the microcosm. Pine cones feature the same golden ratio in an arrangement along the seed scales. And this allows them to optimize seed storage. In addition, because, we'll get into that actually in a couple slides. Keep in mind that these all converge at this center point right here. And same here. And then one more cool, amazing feature of phi is when you take 1 and then you... So if you assign phi to 1.618 and then you subtract 1, you get 0.618. Now if you add 1 to 6.618, you get whatever. So as you can see, these numbers are perfect. Because you take the square root of this and you get this. I'm not sure if that's true. It is. A plus B divided by A is 1.618. So you take A plus B and then you divide it again by A, and you're always going to get this ratio. Always. So it's saying A plus B is equal to... The next step is A plus B times 1.618. And what's amazing is that these numbers, 1.618 squared is 2.618. How is that possible? Or 0.618 to the negative 1 is just losing that 1. How is that possible? That's a magical number. That's how. Moving on. Fractality of octaves and harmonics. So in music, there's the concept of octaves and harmonics. When you go up 1 octave, you double the frequency of a note. For example, if the fundamental frequency of the first harmonic is F, the second harmonic is 2F, and the third is 3F. And thus, doubling of frequency of each octave is a fractal pattern to each other. Harmonics within each octave, you have harmonic overtones. These harmonics are integer multiples of the fundamental frequency. For example, the second harmonic is at 2F, the third harmonic is at 3F, and the fourth harmonic is at 4F. Each set of harmonics follows a fractal pattern, and this pattern repeats as you move from one octave to the next. So here is an example of the first harmonic and second harmonic, third harmonic. And more on this. So when these waves combine into a set of So waves can constructively and deconstructively feed off of each other. In a constructive interference, waves align in a phase, resulting in amplified intensity, and these create a stronger wave. In destructive interference, waves align out of phase, reducing intensity, and it subtracts or cancels out the wave entirely. As you can see on the left, there are the examples. Notice the higher peaks and troughs, if you will, on the left, and notice how they're basically gone because they've been canceled out on the right. The next thing to go along with this fractality in waves is stationary wave patterns. These are waves that are created by the interference of two identical waves traveling in opposite directions, resulting in fixed points of vibration. The points along the wave appear to vibrate in a fixed position, creating a wave with nodes, points of minimal displacement, and antinodes, the bigger places. And the standing waves result from the interference of incident and reflected waves, and they do not appear to propagate through space like traveling waves. So they appear to be in one spot. They are all over nature, and a fundamental fact to fractality. Let's go on to the next slide. We'll get more into this. So with standing waves, there's this concept of fractal embedding. This gives the idea that waves can ride other waves and go along for the ride. Here on the left, you can see that there's embedding happening on this shorter wave, and it's just spinning around in a clockwise fashion, while the other waves in the middle are going in a counterclockwise fashion. I'm sorry, that's backwards. These ones are going in a clockwise fashion, and this one's going in a counterclockwise fashion. That allows them to one to rotate the other way, and the other way to one to rotate the other way, creating a non-interfering pattern where the magnetic waves are kind of embedding each other. This is how a lot of reality works. Here on the left, you can see a series of toruses embedded in each other. As you can see, it just embeds more and more, creating this cool interference pattern in the center too. Now, if you think about how DNA wraps around in the double helix pattern, a lot like this actually, you can start to think about how if we all are just electro waves and we have to embed by perfect nesting at phi ratio, this image on the bottom right is supposed to be, a day, a year, a week. And then each little wave is like a heart breath, your heart rate. But each wave contains, so that when you were able to take a graph of your day, you would see something like this. Or at least that's the idea, at least. What causes an object to fall to the ground is our next topic. The two are related because, well, just look at this. See how this is ratcheting down? It's spinning towards the center at the bottom. So, what causes an object to fall to the ground? Usually people would say it's gravity. Einstein would say that gravity is caused by its space-time curving due to the mass of an object creates a dimple in space-time somehow. But when he came up with that, it was just a stopgap measure. He just didn't have the data to show why at the final point of collision objects are colliding. So, moving from this, there's a few things we need to understand. That there's a unit called the Planck length. This was come up by Maxwell Planck, and he mathematically devised a series through equations. He mathematically devised the smallest length scale in the universe, which is about 1.616 times 10 to the negative 35 meters. And at this scale, it's believed that quantum mechanics and gravity dominate the entire universe at that scale. And this would cause a lot of fundamental physics properties to start to break down. Like at the Planck scale, everything is thought to be quantized or in discrete chunks or units. And what physicists call scalar fields, which include Higgs fields, exhibit their quantum nature prominently at this scale. So what that means is that it's like the field of quantum soup. All happens at this Planck length and lower. So think of that as like the octave for our realities. Above and below these are different harmonics in relation to ours. Okay, so then with that, what is electric charge collapse? I'd say a good way to explain electric charge collapse is the path that electric charge takes when being pulled towards the center of another more polarized electrical torus, like when one atom transfers electric charge to another one. This path is what creates the constant pull of any electric charge towards the center until it arrives at Planck length, if it can. For instance, here on Earth, everything is being pulled towards the center of the Earth due to the Earth's core having a negative charge. It's only positively charged. It's only the Earth's positively charged crust that's really stopping us from just melting in the center of the planet. Let me show you. So on the right here, we have our torus field of our electrical charge. Every time our heart beats, we send out this field until it's pulled back into the center for the next heartbeat. By the way, this has been detected about 60 feet away from the body. It's not strong by our equipment, standards, but it's detectable, which means, yeah, more on that in another video. It's too complicated. But know that here's our electrical field, and our center is being pulled towards the planet's center at all times. If you are within the planet's sphere of influence, you are being pulled towards the core. As you can see, the crust and the upper mantle are positively charged, and the mantle and the crust or the core are negative. And when you ask these chat AIs, why do objects fall to the ground? They start to give you circular logic. They tell you objects fall to the ground because of gravity, a fundamental force. And then you ask, well, why do two objects in a vacuum with electrical charge get attracted to each other? They say gravity and electric charge. They go in circles. You say, well, what causes gravity? They say the mass of an object. And then I say, well, why does an object get more mass if it has more electric charge? And the chat AI would say, it's a negative. It's a minute amount of electricity causes a minute amount of gravity. But the mass of an object is still the reason. What? That makes no sense. Because energy is matter. And matter is energy. If matter doesn't have any energy, it ceases to be matter. I don't see how gravity is inherent in there at all. Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, continuing. So let's assume that gravity is not what's not. So I say that people are being pulled to the planet because of their electric charge is being stuck to the center. This isn't my theory. This is other people's theories. Tom Bearden, Gravitobiology. Here's an animated example of charge collapse. As you can see here on the right, imagine this is little bits of electric charge. As the charge comes in, it gets pulled on the center until it finally gets to the end where it's converted at Planck scale into what we call longitudinal electromagnetic ferrometry, EMF. And these have a change in the direction of the waves. We'll get more into that. Also, please notice that if you take this and you were to flip it, you would have Hermes caduceus. We'll get more into that coming up. And then now looking at pine cones and how they use gravity. Due to the golden ratio of the splines along the splines coverage, at the tip is a perfect example of a cause of gravity. The different splines open up depending on the environmental voltage, aka how fractal the environment is. So if it's starting to get very warm outside, the pine cone will detect the difference in the voltage due to the humidity in the air, and it'll begin to open, and vice versa when it gets cold. Doing so, it is able to direct charge along these splines and get what it needs until you can, stab into the ground, I assume. I don't know. Yeah, so I will look into this more. Next we have the path to charge collapse. So while everything does eventually collapse in the center of a torus, it doesn't. It has to. It can't just hang out there. It's a constantly moving system. So, but if it does follow this perfect path, Dan Winter is coining the term perfected charge collapse, and that is when electric charge, the electron, follows these different vertices along the different edges of these platonic solids. Here on the right, you can see a dodecahedron and a cube and a tetrahedron all over the esoteric symbol known as the Tree of Life. I believe that this is actually a diagram showing how we commune with the lower natures of reality through the higher, and vice versa. So in addition to that, the platonic solids also seem to be the shape of the electron orbitals for different atoms, depending on how many electrons they have in their outer shells. So, for instance, the SPDF suborbitals are a way to describe the electron configuration of an atom. They represent the regions or spaces where electrons are likely to be found, and these suborbitals are part of the electron shell structure of an atom. Physicists have noticed that the number of electrons that fill each suborbital, 2, 6, 10, 14, matches the number of vertices in certain platonic solids. So here on the right, you can see the sharp suborbital, the principal, the diffuse, and the fundamental, all having different numbers of vertexes or electrons. Here the pi is here the sharp is the spike, the pi is the cube. The pi is this one, which is hydrogen. No, I'm wrong. Sharp is spike, principal is cube, diffuse is icosa, and then fundamental is dodeca. Here's some more graphics showing how these platonic solids can nest inside of each other. They don't align like you would think, but if you notice right here, so this is the top of an icosahedron. It's 5 triangles superimposed and meeting at this point at an angle. These vertex lines perfectly with the center of the dodecahedron. So you would enter through this vortex and then go through the center of the dodecahedron into another icosahedron where it's focused again into a square, into an octahedron, into another square, into a tetrahedron, into another tetrahedron, and then finally you have combined back to Planck length. What's missing here is that you have two inverted tetrahedrons, one over each other. Here is some more pictures of Kepler's manual about sacred geometry. It's cool stuff. Notice this one over here with the MM and NN. We'll get back to that. Here's an arrangement of the periodic table by platonic solid shape. And here's another bigger picture of Kepler's model of planets. Continuing with this, Dan Winter has come up with a kit he calls the Star Mother kit. And what you do with this kit is that you go piece by piece from the center out to the outer perimeter, and you build sacred geometry, and you create the Star Mother kit, which is to say the dodecahedron, a icosahedron, another dodecahedron, a cube, an octahedron, and then the star tetrahedron. So here in the top left, you can see the two pyramids, four-sided pyramids, intersecting with each other, going inside of the cube, and then going and creating a star-like structure over here. And then continuing, you just go outwards until eventually you surround the whole thing and have the Star Mother kit. Here in the top right, he's showing that if you remove and just have a dodecahedron and you add bubble fluid to the middle, and then you add or subtract air, the shape is retained, showing perfect embedding and fractality. So this slide, I want to point out how geometric shapes affect charge distribution. So an easy way to think of this is that if you have odd number of sides, charge is going to be distributed. If you have an even number of sides, charge is going to be contained and amplified within there. So with the triangle, you can see the three arrows pointing to the center with a fourth ejecting. The same with the pentagon, 5 arrows coalescing until they eject. The amount of sides up until a point will increase or decrease the amount of charge propagation. On the bottom, you'll see here that a tetracube or a cube and a hexagon can limit charge and focus it. So this would be a good way to build up charge to be distributed later, let's say. Next, going back to longitudinal waves. These are the waves that we showed in the previous slide where it came down that caduceus at the center. It would change vorticity. These are often called scalar waves, and they're infinitely compressible waves that embed inside of the transverse waves. So some properties of these longitudinal waves. They're often called scalar waves, like we just mentioned. They operate in a stack within the transverse waves, like when waves crest on the shore and swell back into the ocean. They operate in a sets of harmonics, giving infinite amounts of space to work within. It's basically worlds within worlds and layers upon layers. Due to their stacking nature, it gives you instant communication because when you add something to one side, the other side is going to get it. And the translation of transverse waves into longitudinal waves is what causes fractality. Excuse me. So the path of longitudinal waves. The translation of vorticity from the transverse occurs at the Planck length. Transverse waves constructively interfere until changing from the up and down waves into packets of waves within the transverse waves. Similar to how waves crest on a sloped shore when they land on the shore, the waves lose their up and down component and it appears to swell back into the future, or swell back into the ocean. So easy way to think about that is here's the shore, and the waves are coming in, And when they hit the shore, they lose their momentum and then they slide back into the ocean. Here, this graphic at the bottom just demonstrates, again, so up and down waves come in here. They up and down until they quickly, and then at Planck length, smooth out, lose their angular momentum, and become a smooth plane. However, they retain their information, and it is translated into the longitudinal EMF. It's not the exact same data, but only data that could be compressed perfectly survives the translation. Keep that in mind. Only perfectly compressed information survives the translation of vorticity. Or the ba from the ka, as the Egyptians would say. Here's a video showing waves on the shore in the swelling back in. Notice how the waves crest up here, and now watch how they swell back in. Riding on top of the incoming transverse waves, you have this foam that just rides along it. And this is happening from the top of the ocean to the bottom of the ocean. There are layers within the waves. So this is kind of where all of the pieces begin to add up into making us realize that we have access to higher dimensions right now. The still point, the center point, the most infinitesimal small point, is what allows the bridging of our worlds. Here's more examples of this. On the left, we have that same graphic of the cone as it goes around. This is at a perfect golden ratio of 1.618 coming down. Here on the right, we have the path. So what happens is at each side of the dodecahedron, as you can see on the top right, each face has got the 5 corners. If you were to have a wave come down each corner, each vertex, and reach the center, they will constructively interfere with each other and add acceleration to the point where they end up going, we assume, 2 times the speed of light before it reaches center, and there is that vorticity change. And at the vorticity change is when that happens, when it gets squirted out the top and bottom, and you go right up and down the harmonics, right up and down. It's what some call the L, the phase shift, because we live the horizontal life, but it's the vertical that dictates. So we're living the L. Here is the Star Mother kit, and showing how these waves do constructively heterodyne into the center, as it's called. So spin becomes dense, and it becomes a recursively interfere until eventually they add velocity, and it increases vorticity until the center, like I said, you're eventually reaching 2 times the speed of gravity. And this is all because of the phi ratio is negentropic in operation. So phi 1.618 is the ratio that allows stars to operate indefinitely, how we regenerate, how plants grow, everything. The fate of the universe is not entropic, and this is the root out of it. So still points and points of vorticity change are portals. To use hydrodynamics as an example, there's a concept called the translation of vorticity. This is the place where up and down waves get converted into packets or longitudinal waves, often called scalar waves. Like in that video I showed you at the shore. This can also be called a spark gap. And the vertices of the dodecahedron, icosahedron, cube, and tetrahedron nest act as wave guides for the flow of charge towards the center. Locations where the electrical field is conductive to charge collapse are hotspots for strange activity. And here on the right, you can see this is a Tesla coil, a homemade Tesla coil, exhibiting a spark gap. And if you look closely in the center between the two, it's like more transparent. That's kind of what we're talking about. Natural and artificial places of charge collapse. A good rule is to follow where the vortices on the platonic solids meet. Implosion is more likely. On Earth, this translates to the location of sacred sites and the nodes of the Earth's dodecahedron. Also, at sunrise and sunset, due to the alignment of the sun on the horizon, it will actually supercharge any charge collapse due to the increased amount of 90-degree charge. I'll do that more on that in another video. Here is the Earth's dodecahedron's grid superimposed over a map of the Earth. Notice but yeah, just notice it. It's beautiful. A lot of the hot spots on the Earth, you notice, have those dots and are focal points. Another place, so an artificial place where charge collapse is more likely is, I believe, depicted in this relief found in Egypt. These Egyptian light bulbs have been confused for so many different things over the years. I think, as Dan Winter has suggested, that these are showing a regenerative field that's being created by the slight off-phase nature of these two tubes. So Dan Winter believes, and he has a product that shows this called Therify, that if you put a high voltage electric charge into the ends of these tubes, and then you modulate a frequency that is, as he called it, phase conjugate to each other, providing a nice smooth electric field allowing charge collapse to naturally happen, you would get a field that would allow you to germinate seeds, meditate very effectively, heal your body, handle all sorts of mental problems, disorders, and more that we're discovering, provided wireless electricity. These tubes are a smaller scale version of what's happening on the planet. Because by having these two different waves slightly off from each other, it provides a feedback pattern that is conducive to life. Here is these light bulbs superimposed with each other. And while the angle of that photo is not perfect, you can see the two snake coils are heterodyning. On the right, I've blown up a picture of the Jed Tower here on the bottom. This is a way to distribute charge. Basically, you would come in through the top, go in through this next pillar, and this next pillar, and the next pillar, and then you connect to the Earth. Electricity. So there's this cool website that I use called leylines.net. You can get ley line maps of the United States and zoom in on yourself. Here, and where you live. Here I've taken just the United States and superimposed the grid over it. But here on the right, we have Washington, D.C., where you can see it's almost directly on the line, not by accident. And then on the bottom here, we have the Great Pyramid. As you can see, it's almost directly at a nodal focal point. Also not on accident. The pyramid used these converging energy waves to do many different things, like quite possibly creating a force field. But they more than likely had machines that resonated at the frequency created by the pyramids, that are amplified by the pyramids, and would resonate at that frequency and use it as a wireless electricity. People have suggested that's how they were creating flying vehicles and such. I would agree with that statement. All right. So how does this all work in the living organism? That's where we started to come at this from. So how does this work? So on the right here, we have a picture of DNA. It's a computer model, of course. So our DNA is the keys to the spacesuit, our human spacesuit, and any living organism. It's like a unique frequency to communicate between those different levels of reality. This is a interview with Michael Levin. He has been studying bioelectricity in organisms. And he's also created these cool little organisms that he calls xenobots that he is able to program to do various tasks. I want to do another video on this one too, because this is actually kind of the keys to where we came from. But yeah, let's just watch this real quick.
I think a lot of the biology community focuses on the chemicals as the signaling mechanisms that make the whole thing work. You have, I think, to a large degree, uniquely, maybe you can correct me on that, have focused on the bioelectricity, which is using electricity for signaling. There's also probably mechanical.
Sure,
like knocking on the door.
Yep.
So what's the difference, and what's an electrical network?
Yeah. So I want to make sure and kind of give credit where credit is due. So as far back as 1903 and probably late 1800s already, people were thinking about the importance of electrical phenomena in life. So I'm for sure not the first person to stress the importance of electricity. There were waves of research in the 30s, in the 40s, and then again in the kind of 70s, 80s, and 90s of sort of the pioneers of bioelectricity who did some amazing work on all this. I think what we've done that's new is to step away from this idea that, and I'll describe what the bioelectricity is step away from the idea that, well, here's another piece of physics that you need to keep track of to understand physiology and development, and to really start looking at this as saying, no, this is a privileged computational layer that gives you access to the actual cognition of the tissue, of basal cognition. So merging that developmental biophysics with ideas in cognition of computation and so on. I think that's what we've done that's new. But people have been talking about bioelectricity for a really long time, and so I'll define that. So what happens is that if you have a single cell has a membrane. In that membrane are proteins called ion channels, and those proteins allow charged molecules, potassium, sodium, chloride, to go in and out under certain circumstances. And when there's an imbalance of those ions, there becomes a voltage gradient across that membrane. And so all living cells try to hold a particular kind of voltage difference across the membrane, and they spend a lot of energy to do so. When you so that's a single cell. When you have multiple cells, the cells sitting next to each other, they can communicate their voltage state to each other via a number of different ways. But one of them is this thing called a gap junction, which is basically like a little submarine hatch that just kind of docks, right? And the ions from one side can flow to the other side and vice versa. So
isn't it incredible that this evolved? Isn't that wild? Because that didn't exist.
Correct. This had to be evolved, and
it had to be invented.
That's right.
So somebody invented electricity in the ocean When did this get invented?
Yeah. So I mean, it is incredible. The guy who discovered gap junctions, Werner Lowenstein, I visited him. He was really old.
Human being?
He discovered them.
Because Because who really discovered them lived probably 4 billion years ago.
Good point.
So you're give credit where credit is due. I'm just saying.
He rediscovered gap junctions, but
So yeah, gap junctions. So gap junctions are protein channels that form channels or pores connecting the cytoplasm of adjacent cells. These channels allow for the passage of ions, small molecules, and electrical signals directly between neighboring cells. Gap junctions are vital for the transmission of bioelectrical signals across tissues and organs. They enable coordinated cellular activity such as synchronizing the beating of heart muscle cells or the movement of cilia in the respiratory tract. This synchronized activity is crucial for the proper functioning of organs and tissues. From bioelectricity to tissue generation, gap junctions play a multifaceted role in the intricate dance of life at the cellular level. We are inhabiting the gaps in between every cell in the body. And then we are using our nervous system to communicate that all back to our brain. Stuart Hameroff is an anesthesiologist. He is an anesthesiologist because he was fascinated with consciousness as a child. He can't understand how we have an entire science on anesthesiology, but no one can tell you why these drugs work. We just know that they do. And that was concerning to him. So he set out to figure out why these drugs work. So eventually he did a lot of research and he discovered that Roger Penrose had written a book called The Emperor's New Clothes. No, The Emperor Has No Clothes. And that book is about how quantum mechanics takes all of physics and just throws it out the window. And that we really don't know anything. Stuart Hameroff took this and he started to look in the brain for quantum parts. He eventually found these things called microtubules. And these microtubules are hexagonal tubes that run throughout all of the body, and in particular in the brain, and they create sort of like a tunneling system for, well, we don't know yet, but we think it's quantum bits, as they would call them. I would say it's longitudinal interferometry. If you look at the right here, again, we have the hexagon, and if you remember, hexagons contain charge. So if you had these little tiny longitudinal waves of charge that need to go from cells to cells, a great way to transport them without having them bleed all over the place would be with hexagonal tubes acting as waveguides. And there was an experiment done a few years ago now where they took one of these microtubules and they set it up and they shot it with a laser. And the way you tell if something is quantum in nature is when you fire a laser at this object. If on the other side you see two lasers, you have a quantum object. They saw two lasers, thus confirming that these microtubules are quantum in nature. So, our body is quantum. Looking more at the shape of charge, there's a concept of piezoelectric force. Piezoelectricity is the phenomenon when certain materials like quartz or ceramics, or maybe microtubules, generate an electric charge in response to mechanical stress or pressure. This piezoelectric effect has two key aspects. The direct piezoelectric effect is the generation of electric charge when a mechanical force is applied. The piezoelectric effect depends on the crystal structure of the material, or any material. Crystals lacking a center of symmetry exhibit strong piezoelectric properties. Notice this picture on the right. It is a hexagon that is empty in the center. Notice the shape. It's like a, I don't know what you call that, like a Y kind of. Then here on the left is showing you hit the quartz and you get some electricity. Piezo means pressure. Now, in the human brain, there are sacs of fluid called ventricles. And these are, for all intents and purposes, like the blood of the brain. These run, as you can see on the right, up and down the spine and then circle through the brain in a cyclical fashion. Itzhak Bentov, in his book Stalking the Wild Pendulum, did research on what Kundalini is in the brain. And what he discovered is that when the heart beats down the left descending aorta, if one holds their breath, there's like the heartbeat will travel down to the end of the aorta, and then if a heartbeat is skipped, there's a reverberation to let the heart know, hey, stop pumping because we just had a problem here. So the heart uses that reverberation to know if there's an issue and if it should stop pumping or continue. So this reverberation, as you can see down here, is captured. You got the first heart sound and then the second heart sound. So it's the thump, the thump. But if it here's the thump, the thump, the thump, thump, it stops. It slows down. Now, that pattern is carried up the aorta until it creates a standing wave in the center, and slowly, through acquiring more and more standing waves, these standing waves travel up the aorta and reach the ventricles of the brain. And these standing waves then begin to propagate in the center of the brain on the third ventricle, or the center, creating still points around where our pineal gland is. The pine cone. And here on the top right, you can see that if you look at the brain as a plasma torus or a torus, and you see the charge as the plasma, it is going in a plasma-like function where it would circle around both sides. It would go like this. And this creates standing waves in the brain. And if you maintain this long enough, the sensation of Kundalini will happen. And the reason people feel an entire body sensation is because if you look at this picture on the top, you can see the sensory cortex homunculus. This is the parts of the brain, parts of the body mapped to the surface of the brain. You know how when they show the doctors opening up a guy's face or brain and touching different parts and different parts move. That's this. So that electric charge will make you feel like your toes are going numb, your legs, your face, your feet, your hands. And then finally, the top of your head generally feels like it's tingling or burning or something. And that is Kundalini. That is a powerful connection using longitudinal interferometry to communicate. Moving on to just our DNA then. So it turns out the shape of DNA with its double helix nature is really just two sine waves ratcheted around a dodecahedron. If you look here at both these pictures, you can see the waves as it turns around each turn of the dodecahedron. Ratchet is around in a counterclockwise motion to the top of the dodecahedron, creating the double helix structure. Here's a better image of it. As you can see, the green line is ratcheted around each dodecahedron. And ratcheting means when you take a shape and then you turn it by one axis. 1 phi ratio turn. Another amazing feature of DNA is that it itself is electrically implosive. This middle picture here, where it says one ring of the ladder of DNA, if you notice that we have a pentagram distributing charge into a hexagram, or it's a cube, to a cube, or a hexagon, then we distribute into another cube, but really we have a hollow center. Allowing charge to propagate right out of the center. DNA radio. How does that combine in the brain? Is through our brainwaves and the different harmonics of reality interacting with our brainwaves. It's long been known that when you're asleep, you'll do delta and theta brainwaves, and when you're imagining, you'll do alpha brainwaves, and beta when you're doing beta work, and gamma when you're doing high functioning. And these frequencies are associated with, the different mental states. These different brain states correlate with the different harmonics in higher and lower densities or dimensions. And the octaves are really just the separation of those different densities and dimensions. And when brain waves are ordered in a correct golden ratio function with the gamma, alpha, theta, beta, delta, it creates like a cone for the charge at the top of the head, as we just showed, for it to use Hermes caduceus and reach that center point at the pineal gland. So you have two parts to this. You have Kundalini-like functions using the piezoelectric force of squeezing into the center of the brain. And then you also have the golden harmonics of brain waves. These two pieces allow shifting to higher and lower realities. And the reason this works is because there's a phenomenon known as four-way mixing. And that is to say that when you fire two energies that are phase conjugate, or that are constructively interfering with each other, so creating higher amplifications, if you fire a third energy wave at those two, it creates a fourth wave that is sent right back at the third stream. This is why the double slit experiment, if you guys are familiar with that, is the way it is. The act of observing changes reality because observing is interacting. And now I think I have, in my own self-assessment, poorly explained this for a first try. I'm going to edit the hell out of this, and I'm going to reshoot it because I didn't even record it on my computer until 16 minutes ago. But now I'd say we have strong evidence that a soul is an electrical plasma that is inhabiting a body. And I think we should start to treat life differently because of that. What we really are we are souls that are communicating through higher levels of reality, through DNA radio, through different octaves. So old practices before the modern age suddenly take on deeper and more serious meanings because they're backed by scientific principles. The woo suddenly becomes not so woo, it becomes real. So things like astrology, remote viewing, Reiki, astral projection, channeling, reincarnation, numerology, crystals, mediumship, auras, higher dimensions, spirit guides, lucid dreaming, Christianity, and so much more are suddenly legitimate, and they suddenly have new light shined on them, why they have been with humanity since the beginning. Not to mention how this begins to uncover our ancient history and why these sacred shapes are all over antiquity. I believe that our ancestors were in possession of knowledge they couldn't quite understand. However, due to the unconscious nature of the soul, it was given to us so that we would internalize it for when humanity's material brain was ready for it. Some more images to kind of make my point here. This is the Mandelbrot set we showed at the beginning. If you zoom in on this little tiny one down here at the bottom, you can see there's the whole thing. The whole Mandelbrot set. And now I like to say is, what if this is us? What if this little guy down here, what if this is us? Here's our crown chakra. Here's the 8th density. And then we start getting into some really cool stuff. And then in ancient history, you will notice that a lot of times they're always holding one of these eggs. And they're always holding it with their fingers aligned on the splines. I've drawn some arrows over this to show that I think that they are putting their electric charge into these splines and focal pointing it at the center, the tip, to transfer energy, knowledge, whatever, information. I'd also like to draw your attention to that flower symbol on their wrist. As we know, the flower of life is a plasma Taurus, the seed of life is a Taurus. So are they showing that they have electric energy amplifiers for the psychic abilities on their wrists? And then this is a slide from Dan Winter. He's showing that by using these vortexes and golden ratio, you can do things like create the rumored German flying saucers. On the top here, we have the Mercury vortex that was rumored the Nazis created. It creates gravity. It comes down at a per golden ratio, one in the center. And then here, I just for fun imposed that image over the Mandelbrot set to show that fractality does create gravity, because flying saucers work by nullifying gravity. So to close, I want to say a big thank you to Dan Winter and to Itzhak Bentov and Thomas and Tom Bearden and so many other people. I guarantee this slide will be updated. And thank you to you, if anyone watches this. My name is Adam David, and thank you.